For a lot of our parents, they understand that we're going to experience some form of racism as soon as we can talk.
What's good, you guys, and welcome back again on another episode today. How are you all doing? I hope you guys are doing well, and if you're joining for the very first time as well, thank you so much for being here today. I have a very interesting video for you guys today. It's a video of a white creator on TikTok who asked the Black community a very good question. This is a very good question because I know by the end of this video we are all going to be able to learn one or two things, and I feel like this question as well is very important because with the outpour of love and the way Black community responded to this question, I'm sure people are going to learn one or two things from his video. So he made a video saying he came across a creator, cooking Thanksgiving food and then talking about the history of Black Americans. And then he found out that Thanksgiving is one of the first holidays that people who were enslaved were allowed to participate in. And he was just so shocked. Then he asked a question and said, how do Black parents have conversation about slavery with their kids? And this is a very good question, and I'm very sure that you will learn one or two things. And if you're that parent struggling about how to introduce your kids to the history of Black people, I'm sure this video is going to come in handy because there was a creator who literally called on 8 and 9-year-old kids as well, telling them to talk to her about the things that they have learned about slavery. And you guys are about to find out how so many people started learning about slavery at a very young age. So without wasting much time, let me just roll the clip of his question and what people are saying about his video as well.
So I just finished watching this video of this woman making food for Thanksgiving, and she was talking about the history of Black Americans and Thanksgiving. And she was talking about how Thanksgiving was one of the first holidays that people who were enslaved were allowed to celebrate. And like many Americans, specifically white Americans who learned about slavery, I'm realizing that my education around the entire topic and history is so skewed and flawed. And the amount of things that I've learned just by following Black creators on TikTok is more than I've ever learned in school. So then I started thinking about the conversations that I had with my parents about slavery when I started learning about it in school. And then it got me thinking, how do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with their children? Is it a conversation that's like you sit down and you lay everything out? Is it like something that you slowly reveal more information about because it's obviously a very traumatic topic? Or for anybody out there, was it something that your parents even talked to you about, or was it something that was like, oh, learned it in school? This is a 100% genuine question, and I just want to learn the differences of how Black families teach about slavery versus white families.
That was the question he asked, and I would like to hear you guys' thoughts in the comment section. If you're watching this video, before you start listening to people talking about how their parents introduced the history of slavery to them, I would like to hear your own in the comment section. Please feel free, take your time to type in the comment section how your parents had the conversation of slavery with you, or how you're currently having that conversation with your kids. So without wasting much time, let's get right into how the people respond to this particular one, because people really turn up for this one.
How do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with their children? Is it a
This is a conversation that we often call the talk. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a very Black neighborhood, go to a Black church, and attend a mostly Black elementary school. Slavery wasn't a topic that we didn't broach or that we didn't talk about. We also didn't feel this weird sense of shame that I know some people in our community feel. The way I was taught is that slavery was something that was done to us, but not something that defines us. I was more so taught that this was the history of white people, not the history of Black people. Because I was surrounded by so many Black voices, especially early on, there was never a sense of shame put into me about this thing that happened to us. If anything, it shows the initial point of our struggle with this country for our civil rights, our human rights. It shows the endurance and the power and the strength of Black people. It is a difficult conversation. It almost feels like you're taking away your kid's innocence in a way. As a new parent, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to have this conversation. Yeah, I hope that helps.
How do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with their...
In families that are openly and proudly Black, the conversation about racism is always happening. It's when the children start to notice that you're talking about racism and they come to you with questions that you actually start the conversations, because there's never a starting point. And we don't start with slavery. We start with racism. Right? You might hear your grandmother huffing and puffing, frustrated about something that she watched on the news. You might see your dad grumbling about the fact that this Black man didn't get elected, and you start to be curious, but you're constantly putting, like children, you're constantly putting together clues So you don't come to these conversations with like really academic questions. You come to the conversations trying to make sense of your observations in your parents' kind of culture that they've built for you. Now, when it comes to slavery, that's an academic question. Now, in a city like Atlanta, you are going to have teachers who use Black History Month to talk about people who've done things, and they'll say they were enslaved and later on they did this. You're going to have plays and presentations, and so the children are going to constantly hear that. But when my kid came home talking about Thomas Jefferson, her teacher taught about Thomas Jefferson and all the wonderful things he did, I said, yeah, Thomas Jefferson did a lot of things as a politician, but he was ultimately a bad guy. And she said, why? And I said, because Thomas Jefferson had a farm, a really big farm, bigger than he and his family could care for, but he wanted that big farm anyway because he was super greedy. And so instead of hiring people to work that farm and giving them their money, he kidnapped people and forced them to work the farm so he could keep all the money. And if they tried to run away, he beat them. And I looked at her and I waited for her shock and and we sat and had that conversation. But the conversation about slavery tends to come later than the conversation about racism. And it's just it's a normal part of how we live.
How do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with their children?
Forgive me, I'm very sick. So for our household, I guess it was always a thing. I guess my earliest memory was in elementary school. There was a movie that they played about slavery in general. And I remember it because it terrified me as a kid. There was a song that they sung where the words were, follow the drinking gourd, for the old man is coming to carry you home. Follow the drinking gourd. And so at a young age, it was there always. The old man had a regular foot and a peg foot, and you followed that trail to the river. And it was just, like we would watch it yearly. And that was just outside of the house. Like there was going from the third grade to the fourth and fifth grade hall, a poster of this poster specifically that I looked at every time I was crossing up that ramp. My grandmother used to give tours around the city of Atlanta. And so again, from Atlanta, automatically let you know, like, we were never afraid of the conversation. It was never foreign to us, this conversation of Black liberation, Black history, slavery. She used to give us these tours. We were constantly going to the Baptist church, going to the King Center. So we were always around the knowledge of slavery. There's a museum called the Apex Museum here in the city. I highly recommend it. And there's a lot of positive stuff there, but to get to the positive stuff, you've got to go through the history of slavery. There are books that my folks just had lying around that talk about it. The first time I heard Emmett Till's name was in a book that I just found sitting in the house. And those books are still here. From like when I was very little, they're still here. Vacations with my grandmother were spent going to museums, going to marches. When I was in elementary school in fifth grade, I made it to the end of a Jeopardy tournament, and my grandmother took me to a cemetery and pointed out grave sites and talked about the history of African American people. And again, Black schools, we were never afraid of the conversation of slavery. When Black History Month come around, it was not it was like we were working hard to teach you everything that happened at that point. So the real question comes into, at what point in your growth did you start to learn more? Because we always had it. It was always a conversation that was here. There was never we're going to sit down and have the slavery conversation. That never happened. It was always there. And it was at a point in yourself that you went out to learn more, that you put in the effort yourself to learn what was actually going on. We weren't given all the brutality and the realness of it because we're kids. But we weren't lied to. Like, to this day, I can find the Big Dipper, Little Dipper, and the North Star, no matter where I am, because of that movie.
How do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with their children?
One, I want to shout out to this creator on TikTok and say this is a really good question, and I really applaud your desire to learn more information and seeking out that information from Black creators and other Black people. So shout out to you. The second thing I'd like to say is that I am in no way answering for the diaspora of American Blacks or West Indian Blacks or anything like that, okay? So if anyone else has anything that they'd like to contribute, I'm down to hear. I'd love to hear how you guys would talk about slavery. As for me, how my mom taught slavery was that she first taught us about Black excellence. She instilled in us a level of confidence and a level of awareness of who we were, and to make sure that nobody else allowed us to feel like we were down. She was also very, very defensive of her kid. I'm talking like Mama Bear. She was very defensive. And she always said that, hey, I will go hard for you guys. I will go tooth and nail, but I need to make sure that I have all the facts and you're telling us the truth. Okay. So when we were learning about Black excellence, another thing that I think a lot of times we don't have nowadays, and I'm not a parent, so I can F off of this information happily. We're relying too much on the school district to teach the children about education, right? We're relying too much on them. And I get it. I grew up in a time with no internet, so I understand the challenges. I understand it's easy to put an iPad, but my mom was doing workbooks with us like a couple grades, maybe at least 3 grades ahead of the grade that we were going into. Okay, so there was never a lack of education or confidence was never really a problem in our house. And I grew up in the height of hyper Black consumerism. Okay, so she would basically say, "Hey, this is your history. This is where you're from. This is what they will try and do, and your job is not let them make you feel that way." And it was that. And she was teaching my brother and I from the age of 8 and 6 about the statistics of a Black male growing up in America. And that is to be dead, gay, in jail, or addicted to drugs by the age of 25. Now that had an adverse effect on me growing up, because then I was like, oh, I'm going to go as hard as possible till 25. And then at 25, I realized I was going to be here for a while. So then I ended up having to do that. Blah, blah, blah. I don't want to be too long with it. All I'm saying is that I believe that if we were to, and by we, I mean just literally parents in general, like doesn't just have to be Black or brown parents, but if we were to step up our educational emphasis of the history of wherever we're at, or the people of whoever's been oppressed, or other people who have been oppressed, then we would be able to combat a lot of the propaganda that we see that is being, displayed, whether from Israel towards Palestine, or whether from the American media and government towards Black and brown communities all over the United States. Education is so important. And my mom was an immigrant. She was born in Jamaica, immigrated to New York, and then, I was born in Seattle. And I think that one of the trickiest parts about talking about slavery and or racism is really in proximity to where the person of color grew up. Okay, so I was born in Seattle. Northwest and West Coast racism is way different than obviously down South racism. That's the thing about racism, is very diverse, and that's why it's hard for a lot of white people. And I'm not fucking making them giving them a scapegoat, but it's hard for white people to really grasp what racism is, because of its different shades and its different ways that it shows up. Okay, so when we're talking about slavery, if I'm able to have kids, and I, whatever child I have, if it's Black and mixed, or Black and, Black and Black, or Black and West Indian, I'm definitely stating full-heartedly, I'm going to teach them about their history, but I'm going to start with the Black excellence. I will dispel the myths that I know that we're going to just talk about in the classrooms, and remember to try and educate and not rely so much on the educational system, because as I've stated before, the educational system here in America is broken, it's dispelled, and we need to be more proactive and definitely be more aware of what's being taught, and we need to be able to combat that with facts and maybe consulting with others. Feel free to tell me if I'm wrong. Talk to you later. Peace.
How do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with their children? Is it a
So my mom had us watch a bunch of shows and movies like Roots, Queenie, Beloved, anything that was during the slavery time period. That's what she would have us watch. And throughout the show or the movie, if we had questions, she would answer it. And any questions we had, she would answer it as honestly as she could. And let me say, it was very traumatizing, because I was around 4 or 5 and my sister was around 8 or 9 when we started watching these things. And yeah, trauma. But it was good to know, because we did not learn about this stuff in school, like at all. A lot of it was brought to us as indentured servitude, not slavery. So it was good that I had that type of mom, and she taught us that.
How do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with their children? When I was a kid, we would visit my grandma quite a bit. So I grew up in a single parent household, right? Because my mom and my dad divorced when I was 1 year old. So I've never known him. And because my mom was young and she was still going to school and working, she depended a lot on her parents to help raise me. Now, they're no longer together, and they weren't together any of the time that I was a kid, but they always remained the best of friends. It was my grandma, my papa, and me in the middle. This was like in 2012. That being said, not only was I exposed to information from my mother, but from both of them as well. Now, my papa, right, he was a grilling man. When I was with him, we spent a lot of time at cookouts, family reunions, gatherings of any sorts, making barbecue, playing dominoes, and he really liked Motown. So I learned a lot about his time from being with him and doing the things that he liked to do. But there wasn't a lot of talk about family history when it came to him. Those kind of conversations happened at my grandma's house. This is her when she was 16. Now, my grandmother's mother, Lydia, and her daddy, Grandpa Jack, had both passed on when I was a very small baby. That's my grandma right there. Ain't she cute? But because my grandma kind of liked to know about who was related to who had died this time and where they used to live and over all the connections, right? That was my grandma. She held on to those stories. And so she was able to tell me as a young child about my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother. Now, my great-grandpa Jack was a sharecropper. And of course, me as a young kid not knowing what that was, I would ask questions. And that, in a way, opened a door for me. Because I would hear my mom and my grandma talking about these people, right? Like, this is Grandma America, who my mom and my grandma would talk about all the time. But to me, it just sounded like people from a fairy tale. So I had to ask questions like, well, who was that? This is Great-Grandpa Jack's mother. Now, because we were always running and ripping, visiting family that my grandma needed to go see or talk to, and my Uncle Otis, right, who was a Tuskegee Airman, that I actually was able to know during his lifetime. Of course, he was bedridden at the time, and he was about 99 years old, but I got to know him, speak to him. He got to see me. We went to his house to visit. So these were things that were introduced to me as a small child. And being able to see firsthand who these people that my grandma and my mother were always talking about actually were, and actually learning about the time in which they lived, was really important for me. Because although I wasn't really learning a whole lot about it in school, my mom made sure to teach me that I really knew where our people came from. This is my grandma's mom. And on that far side over there, that's my great Aunt Amanda, who I had the pleasure of knowing during her lifetime. I also attended her funeral. Now, because I was able to learn all of this information from these people and about these people, and because I was starting to ask questions, my mom made sure to educate me by having me watch Roots, Rosewood, Amistad, Color Purple, Queen, Imitation of Life, A Raisin in the Sun, movies like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. These movies that she knew were going to kind of paint a picture from where it started and how it had progressed throughout the years, leading to where we were now. Because here's the thing. When I was first called the N-word, I was 6 years old. So for a lot of our parents, they understand that we're going to experience some form of racism as soon as we can talk or are perceived as Black in this racialized society. So if we are old enough to experience it, why shouldn't we be old enough to learn about why it's happening and where it comes from? You see, a lot of our parents know that whatever we're going to be taught in school is going to be largely skewed to the white perspective and also very, very limited on information. So they make sure, right, that we are educated on what the truth was. And I'm doing that same thing with my own kids who are Afro-Indigenous, so that they understand the truth about this country's history, why things operate the way they do. Because one of the main ways that we can protect our children is by informing them with the truth. Knowledge is power.
How do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with their children?
So in our house, we talked about it slowly, kind of a build to this history. In a lot of households, I think we are trying to emotionally protect our children because we know the world will not protect them when it comes time to have these conversations in school. If you are the lone Black kid, when the topic comes up in a classroom, everyone turns to look at you. If you have the wrong kind of history teacher, they're going to try and argue with you that slavery wasn't that bad. And because I have a degree in history and my husband and I both come from families where the person who was enslaved was our grandparents' grandparent, or in one case, grandparents' parent, we are having the kind of conversations you have where slavery is not abstract. Slavery is a very real part of family history. But we also had to prepare our kids for the reality that in school, depending upon teacher, classroom, all of these things, they might hear some things that they would know were not necessarily accurate. And they would need to be able to disagree respectfully. It was not a comfortable experience, right? It was not terrible. My kids were raised in Chicago. They went to schools that were predominantly Black, so it was easier. But I definitely know people who went to majority white schools who had teachers that were very slavery denialists, shall we say. That's why we have those news stories, it seems like every year, where someone decides to hold a fake slave auction or decides to have children write about the economic benefits of slavery. It's not by accident. It is a way of undermining the truth of America's history. So you have to build in the wall against the lie, if that makes sense. Hope that answered your question.
Thinking, how do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with their children?
So I'm a millennial, born in the 80s, the late 80s. And the way that I learned about slavery was through conversations with my grandmother, who was actually born on a slave plantation. My grandmother is still alive. She's in her mid 80s. She just retired about 3 years ago from working. She worked on a slave plantation up until she was 16 years old. She was born on a slave plantation. Her father was born on a slave plantation. He was a sharecropper. His family was born on a slave plantation. You can literally go to that same slave plantation in Louisiana right now, and you can see the big house, you can see the slave quarters, you can see all that. You can see the very land that my grandparents, my grandmother and her family all worked on. You can see this. In addition to having these conversations about my grandmother's childhood, back when we were growing up, television networks were not shy about talking about slavery in America. Like Disney used to have specials on it regularly. Like there was this show called Night John. I'm sorry, it was a movie. And that was one aspect. When we went to school, we had plays that talk about the Underground Railroad in complete context. And I remember this song in elementary school that they used to teach us called Follow the Drinking Gourd. We also had shows like Reading Rainbow that allowed us to learn about our history through storytelling. And so because of these shows, we were able to ask questions of our parents and our grandparents. Now, that same experience is very different for children today, and it will be very different for my children because a few years ago, they stopped playing Saturday morning cartoons. Shows are not going there the way that they used to on Disney and Nickelodeon. Like there was like full on shows like you would not believe. Like right now, you think book banning is something that is hindering us from learning. The way that writers used to really talk about slavery in a way that a child could digest the concept of slavery at its very basic level was very prevalent when we were growing up in the 90s. But our kids don't have that now. So now they learn through TikTok, they learn through Instagram. If they're lucky, they'll be able to find a show. Like I know that the Proud Family does certain episodes where they'll go there about Black history and Kwanzaa and so many other things, but you got to have a subscription to Disney Plus. I know that PBS still does some documentaries, but I don't know about children's shows. I haven't seen that information on Disney and Nickelodeon and Nick Jr. the way that we used to see it. I'd say when it hit the 2010s, things became very different. You literally have to go digging for this information to get it taught to you at a child level. But back to the conversation of how do we discuss slavery? I have textbooks, I have picture books. When my children are old enough, we'll start having conversations about our family history. I will be able to take them to the plantation that my grandmother, their great grandmother, was born on, and we will have conversations. They can still talk to their great grandmother today, and they can literally learn from her today. They also have great aunts. My great aunts are alive, the ones that are older than my grandmother. If they are able to discuss their experiences, because it is a traumatic experience, they will be able to talk to my children. So, in summation, the way that we learn about slavery in our household is through storytelling. And we will continue to tell those stories.
Cool. And then it got me thinking, how do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with...
So talk to me. Tell me like what you understand about slavery, what you've been taught in school, what we talked about.
Okay. I was taught that there was many kinds of slavery.
Okay.
So like the Europeans, they were slaving the Indians, and they were and some slavery, they would let their slaves go. Mm-hmm. They would put them to work for a few days and then decided to leave. And I heard this one explorer, forgot his name, but he slaved for 7 years straight.
Wow.
Didn't get out of it. Mm-hmm. And then...
But do you know that there was many different types of slavery, but mainly 2 types, chattel and indentured. And indentured is where, I don't know, it's sort of like if you have people that live with you and they do work for you and you take care of them, like maids and stuff. Exactly. And then chattel is what our people went through, where we were bought and sold. And we were sold in the United States. We were sold in Africa. We were sold in the Caribbean and many other places.
What? The girl that took them over the railroad, she kind of was like a slavery hero, if I would say.
Mm-hmm. Who was that?
I forgot her name. Halle Bailey is they're doing a whole movie on it.
Okay, what's her name?
I totally forgot.
Okay, so it was Harriet Tubman that she was talking about. Now, who are you talking about? You want to talk about Rosa Parks?
No, I don't want to do that.
Okay, well, who do you want to talk about?
Martin Luther King Jr.
Martin Luther King Jr.?
So, in my homework, I was reading about Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and I learned that that he went around the world and he had speeches.
Mm-hmm.
And he dreamed.
He dreamed? What was his dream about? To be equal?
Yeah, to be equal no matter what skin color.
What their skin color was, exactly. So did you know that our family is based out of South Texas? So TT was born in a small town called Kingsville, which is right outside of Corpus Christi. And why that is significant is because Texans were literally the last ones to know that they were free. Can you believe that? The last one. And as a result, what holiday do we have now because of that?
Martin Luther King Jr.
No.
It's
in June.
I don't know actually. 4th of July?
Juneteenth.
Oh. I forgot.
What you were talking about was the Jim Crow and there were Jim Crow South. These laws mainly took place in the Jim Crow South. So in places like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, all of the places in the aggregate South is where you're talking about Jim Crow. And those laws, you're right, different water fountains. They could only go in different places. We're kind of seeing that today with who? With who? With who's in the news right now? Who does mommy talk about right now?
Palestine and Israel.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's the same as the Jim Crow South.
So is that kind of like slavery? Because the Israel people don't want the Palestinian people?
Well, that's a system called apartheid. That's a little different. They just want them to be totally separate and not have any of the same rights as Israelis.
But if they don't want to be together, why do they keep bombing the wall?
I don't know, honey. I don't know. We'll have to...
Really?
Let's talk about where Daddy lives right now. What city does Daddy live in?
Tulsa.
Tulsa.
Oklahoma.
Yep. And you know what happened there?
What?
There was a city called Greenwood where there was a lot of very successful Black people. There was a community of very successful Black people. And there was an incident where a lady said that something happened that didn't happen. And then the white citizens of that city came in and completely destroyed the city.
Oh.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it could never be like the boy who cried wolf at all.
Well, it's usually the boy that cries wolf a lot.
Yes, because she said the boy who cried.
Yeah, that's what happened with who else? Emmett Till. Emmett Till. Do you guys know who Emmett Till is?
No.
He was visiting his family. So he was from Chicago, and I believe he was visiting his family down in Mississippi.
Oh.
And yep, a white woman said that he had whistled at her. You know,
he whistled at her, and then a bunch of white people that came out of nowhere and started attacking.
Yep, took him, and then what his mom did is that she wanted to show the world what was going on. So he was so badly bruised and disconfigured and everything, but she wanted him to have an open casket so that she could show the world what the world had done to her son, and that was Emmett Till. So there's many stories, and I don't want to put too much on you, that you can't.
I want to learn.
Yeah, I want you to learn, but I also want you guys to know that oh God. I want you guys to know that, even though we are in a different world, it's important that you know your history. Hello? Okay. That you need to know your history.
Jordan's at the door.
Oh gosh. Terrible attention spans.
What do you guys think about what they all said? I would like to really hear your own side of the story in the comment section. I would like to hear how your parents as well talk to you or let you in on slavery, or how you're currently telling your kids about slavery as well. One of the things that I found out in this video was that Thanksgiving was the very first holiday that the people who were enslaved were allowed to participate in America. And it's just very funny because, like he said and confirmed in his video, history has been watered down. Like, this information has been mixed to fit into the narrative that they want to pass to a lot of people. I came across some interesting comments that I will be reading out to you guys as well. There were so many comments in the comment section, and one of the things that I noticed in the comment that I came across personally was a lot of people saying, my mom introduced me to this, my mom told me this, my mom told me that. So this is like a shout out to mothers who always make sure that their kids are well prepared for this jungle we call world, because it must have been very hard to find a way to narrate a story or tell your kids, your 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old kids, in a way for them to understand, so that when they are teaching them in school, if something sounds fishy to them, they are able to ask questions and say, this is not what my mom told me, this was different from what I was told. That must have really been a very hard job. This comment here said, great question. My mom would ask what I learned at school, and she would tell me the truth and more afterwards. It's sad to see that a lot of things that we were being fed in school was not totally true. It's just so sickening. This comment said, my mom didn't sugarcoat anything. She was careful of how she presented because I was so young, but she made sure I knew the whole truth. She even read books that laid out all aspects of slavery, from capture to its abolishment. Some of the book had pictures that were really intense, and I was so afraid to look at them, but I would make myself look despite that. I appreciate my mom's approach because while she didn't want to overwhelm me, she made sure I knew the whole truth. It was one of the most important things I ever learned as a kid because it sets the tone for so much in my life. Another one said, my mom used to say we have to teach us our own history because they never will, or even the one they will would have been mixed. Who gives you the foundation? Our family had to fill in the gaps. This other person said, my mom was super blunt with it, to be honest. It was a heavy load, but she knew I wasn't going to learn in schools. You guys are seeing every single person saying my mom, my mom, my mom. Shout out to all mothers out there. It's not easy. Another person said, I honestly don't remember a time not knowing. They talked to me all my life. But I vividly remember being 6 and watching a movie about racism, which on Disney, I think. I would like to hear what you guys think in the comment section, and if you are willing to share as well, I would really appreciate. And I know a lot of people are going to be in the comment section to read your story about how your parents had that conversation with you, or how you intend to introduce your kids to knowing more about history. Let me hear your thoughts in the comment section. Thank you all so much for joining. Please subscribe before you go and turn on your bell notification. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, and I love you guys.